Let's look at how to create a dataset in BitYota. Dataset is a set of related files or directories that belong together. So it could be a recurring load coming out of SQL customers table, for example. So there's a mapping between sort of the source entity and the destination entity. So in this case, I'm going to call this. I have some sample data. And my bucket structure will look like this. So my top level bucket is S3 BitYota test. Next field is where we actually look at one of the sample files inside your dataset bucket and actually do assisted schema discovery. So particularly important for JSON where you may have varying attributes and key values. So this gives you kind of a suggested schema. If you have CSV files and you have a header on that, we'll read that header as well. Or if you already know your data and you would like to provide your schema, you can do this skip schema dataset discovery. Otherwise, leave it in and we'll suggest a schema. So this is the file I'm going to give to read. The other thing to think about in the S3 bucket is if you have a recurring data set, then you want to create it with the recurring interval as part of the name. So in this case, I have a daily bucket, and so every day I'm exporting data. So I've created a bucket which changes every day, and then inside each bucket will be the file or the files associated with that day's interval, and so on. So this is standard Unix patterns. And this we will use to also detect the rate of arrival of your data. So when we do a schedule load, we can say, hey, it looks like your data is coming every day or every hour. Would you like us to load at this frequency? So you don't have to tell us that your data set is recurring. We'll automatically discover that. So I'm going to go off and do a data set discovery. And so again, in the assisted schema discovery, we will do a best guess. So we will read a certain portion of the file and find kind of the most prevalent set of keys and values and use that for schema discovery. If your data changes or it changes within the file or changes later, you want to go and modify that later. But in the case of JSON, we will store the entire JSON as a single column of JSON data type. So even if your attributes or your schema changes at a later date, you still have the flexibility of not having to modify your extract and load. So when it finishes discovering, this is what the screen will look like. So it'll show the data set that we use for discovery. It'll show the data set file name pattern. And if this was a recurring pattern, it would put in the YYYMMDD, etc. This is JSON, so the record delimiter is just a new line. There's no field delimiter. It's a single line per JSON document. No headers. There's no data. There's no recurring data, so it doesn't look for a schedule of arrival. This field is particularly important if you have a recurring data set. So this is going to say, I know your data set occurs every hour or every 2 hours, but sometimes data might be late because of upstream processes. So how long do you want me to wait before I read that newly arrived data? And so this is saying, by default, wait for 30 minutes. This is the discovered JSON. You can see there's a sample row here as well. What it's showing you is that the entire JSON will be available in the top level column. So the table will contain a column called JSON_column. And then if you wanted to separate out and load certain key attributes because you use them very frequently, as their own structured columns, you could as well. So in this case, for example, I might pull out rating, remote address, and so on, right? So that's the benefit of it. If you wanted to do computed columns, you could add them in here as well. The override schema is where you would provide your own schema, and this is in the format that's listed here. In general, you want to look at this page as sort of the orchestration page for your data. There's a number of sort of handy links that come out depending on the state of the data that's available. So we've just finished discovering our Cloud On dataset. And again, it looks very, very similar. So you can see it's a recurring bucket. Data comes every day. And similarly, one record delimiter. And you can see there's a fair number of sub columns and columns in there. So this is essentially a mobile application that's sending out event information in JSON format.